Time to review the biggest, baddest tank in the Guard Codex then. Today we'll be turning our lens on the Baneblade. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel where we're all about getting the most out of all of our models on the tabletop. Today we'll be continuing our look through the Astra Militarum Codex. We've been going datasheet by datasheet, seeing what we can get out of each of our units, and now it's the turn of the Baneblade. In this video we'll be taking a look at its datasheet, any obvious buffs or synergies, and how I would field one on the tabletop. For the purposes of this video we're going to just focus on the main Baneblade, the one with the actual Baneblade cannon, and talk about the use of these super heavies in general. We're going to have a look at the other relative variants in their own video in a few days' time, so check back later if you'd like to see that. In the background, the Baneblade and its variants are ancient STC contracts dating back to the Great Crusade, armoured behemoths that exemplify mankind at its height. The understanding of making these tanks has long been lost. Forge Worlds can only just copy the STC designs, and only few Forge Worlds are capable of even managing that. Baneblades and their variants are only used when they are needed, for to risk sacrifice of such a noble machine for a trivial cause would be foolish indeed. Fighting alongside one of these emboldens their fellow Astra Militarum. To see such a relic of unimaginable power ploughing inexorably onwards with enough firepower to devastate entire enemy formations. The interior of the Baneblade has more in common with a fortified battle bunker than the inside of a military vehicle. It has multiple command decks and access points for firing its many weapon systems, supported by a maze of corridors through which its crew keep the machine rumbling forwards towards the foe. So a mighty machine indeed. Let's see what it can do on the tabletop. So the Baneblade is a Lord of War choice for Codex Imperial Guard, meaning it will need to be fielded either as a super heavy auxiliary, in a squadron of 3 in a super heavy detachment, or alongside some HQ choices as part of a Supreme Command detachment. It'll only get its regimental bonus if you field it in one of the second 2 ways. But seeing as Guard HQs are so cheap and tank commanders are among them, the Supreme Command detachment is a good way to get a Baneblade with regimental doctrines. At base with no sponsons, it will set you back 394 points, so a significant investment, and you get a very impressive profile indeed. It's movement 10, weapon skill 5 up, ballistic skill 4 up, strength 9, toughness 8, 26 wounds, 9 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3 up save. It's armed with the signature Baneblade cannon, the hull-mounted Demolisher cannon, which due to the recent errata is now heavy D6 against all targets, a twin heavy bolter, and adamantium tracks. It degrades in the normal way. When it's half wounds or less, it will degrade in movement, ballistic skill and attacks. The Baneblade cannon has a decent profile. It's a 72-inch heavy 3d6 weapon with strength 9, AP -3 and damage 3. So basically like a battle cannon that's been souped up in every way. Against your average toughness 7 or 8 vehicle, say a Space Marine Rhino or a Lehman Russ tank, it'll do an average of just under 9 wounds, so that cannon's quite likely to either cripple or kill a tank a turn. The Demolisher cannon is also no slouch, putting out an average of 3 or 4 wounds per turn on a hard target such as a Rhino or a Lehman Russ. The adamantium tracks are strength user, so strength 9, AP -2 and damage D3, so kind of a similar profile to a Night Stomp. Obviously it only hits on 5s in close combat, so isn't very reliable, but the Baneblade is a really good choice of tank to use the Crush Them stratagem on, to have it hit on 2s and potentially deal a really serious amount of damage in close combat as well. It has a few options. You can take a Hunter-Killer missile for 6 points, which is a little bit of a very tiny upgrade on a very big tank. I'd probably buy one if I was thinking about using some serious buffs to upgun the Baneblade, but it's not really a big deal either way. It can take a Storm Bolter or a Pintle-mounted heavy stubber, which again is another very small upgrade for a very big tank, but I would pick one up for 2 points and I'd choose the heavy stubber, because this guy can move and shoot heavy weapons without penalty. Finally, it can take either 2 sets or 4 sets of sponsons, and each sponson consists of either a twin heavy bolter and a las cannon, or a twin heavy flamer and a las cannon. Basically these let you scale how much damage output you want your Baneblade to do. Either it can be fairly cheap, reasonably durable point for point, and have lower damage output, or you can load as many as 4 las cannons and 8 heavy bolters onto the thing, make it highly damage dealing, but then of course the durability point for point will go down, because you'll lose more points for the same durability. Out of the options, I would take the heavy bolters over the heavy flamers, just for the range more than anything else. You don't really want to be strongly incentivized to put your Baneblade right up in the face of the enemy. It's better to have the option to either stay back and deal decent damage, or to go up and charge and try and use the crush them stratagem. And to my mind, you don't really want a bunch of heavy flamers trying to sway you in the way of charging yourself up and exposing yourself to more damage, if it might not necessarily be the best thing. Each set of las cannon and heavy bolter sponsons will cost you 29 points per sponson, so 58 points for 2, and 116 points for 4. The heavy flamer sponsons cost you 43 points each, so that's 86 points for 2, so they're a considerably higher investment. The points drop on the las cannon certainly helps this guy out, and they certainly make the sponsons a bit more of a viable option. In all honesty, I think I could happily take none, one or both sets of sponsons. It just really depends on how much damage output you want out of your Baneblade, compared with buying other things for your army, such as additional tanks. The Baneblade has some nice special rules. It'll explode on a 6 and everything within 2d6 inches will suffer d6 mortal wounds, so it does have the potential to really take a chunk out of yours or the opponent's army if it goes down in flames. I'd usually try and have a command point spare just in case you do roll the dreaded 6 if it's in the midst of your army. And if it's right in the middle of your opponent's army, it could even be worth trying to command reroll it to get an explosion on a 6, just for a very small chance of nuking a large portion of the enemy force all in one go. It has smoke launchers, which you're unlikely to ever use, to be honest, as you have to forego shooting to get that -1 to hit benefit. Maybe there might be a turn when you don't have anything to shoot at because you can't get line of sight to anything, but I think that's usually going to be unlikely, and every turn that happens is a turn that your Baneblade is kind of wasted. Finally, it has the Steel Behemoth special rule, which is the rule that means it doesn't mind about moving and shooting heavy weapons. It doesn't get a negative to hit penalty for doing so. It can fall back in the movement phase and still shoot and charge for the rest of the turn. And the Baneblade can even fire its guns while in close combat, but only twin heavy bolters or twin heavy flamers can target the units that it's actually in close combat with. Everything else has to target something else. This last bit actually means that it can be quite advantageous to have the Baneblade in close combat, as it means that you can shoot enemy gunline elements while not being shot by them yourself, plus you get to do the damage from that crushing tracks. You just need to make sure you're not in combat with something that is going to do significant damage to your Baneblade. So overall, the Baneblade is a steel fortress that you can cover with virtually as many guns as you'd like. It's around as durable as 2 Lehman Russes stuck together, but does cost a little bit more. And it does decent damage versus most armoured targets. So let's see any obvious buffs and synergies that we can get out of it on the tabletop. Firstly, regiment choice for Baneblades that do have a regiment trait because of the Supreme Command detachment or the Super Heavy detachment. Cadian can give you reroll 1s to hit, although it does mean that you have to stay still. And also you can access overlapping fields of fire to potentially have your Baneblade hit on a 3 rerolling 1s. Having access to the Relic of Lost Cadia can also help you if you're fighting Chaos or give your Baneblade reroll 1s to wound for a turn, so that can help too. Kaschan will let you reroll some numbers of shots with that Demolisher and Baneblade cannon. Valhallan will let you degrade slower, which is particularly helpful on a Baneblade because as it's such a big tough vehicle, you're at a lot higher chance of being degraded without being killed outright, so being able to keep on shooting on 4 up is really quite handy, as dropping to Ballistic Skill 5 really hampers the Baneblade's performance. Vostruans will help out the tank's range for its Demolisher cannon and secondary weapons, but the main reason to run one as Vostroyer is the Firstborn Pride stratagem that will allow it to hit on 3s for just 1 command point. If you are running a Vostroyan one, then I'd probably use that 1 command point every turn, as you're going to get more value out of it on a Baneblade than virtually anywhere else in the army. Talon don't really get that much out of a Baneblade, because it already has the benefit of ignoring heavy weapon penalty. The only reason to take it as Talon would be to keep it off the board via their outflank stratagem to ensure that the Baneblade gets the first strike on the enemy army before your opponent gets to shoot it themselves. It's a pricey stratagem, but it could be a big deal. Armageddon will let you ignore AP-1 weapons, though these aren't usually the biggest threat to your Baneblade. And finally, Mordian will allow you to have better overwatch, making the Baneblade potentially near unassaultable if you have the combination of Parade Drill plus defensive gunners to get it to hit on 4s. As the Baneblade is such a big heavy unit, there are quite a lot of good synergies with several other characters and buffing units to both increase the damage and durability of the tank. In terms of characters, Yarick or Harker can give it reroll 1s, which will be fairly valuable as it's such a massive unit and is a lot better investment of the sort of reroll than some of the other places in the Guard Codex. Astropaths and Psychers are really great with Baneblades. I think that now Astropaths are just 15 points, I would pretty much always take 2 Astropaths along if I was taking a Baneblade. One to cast Night Shroud to make it -1 to hit, and one to cast Psychic Barrier to give it a 2-up save, to basically make your Baneblade very hard to take out, so it can carry on being a menace all game long hopefully. Tech Priest Engine Seers can repair your Baneblade, which could potentially be handy if it does drop down a bracket. They are more likely to get their repairs to work because he's more likely to take damage without dying than some other vehicles with lower wound characteristics. There are a few fancy Forge World units that work well with Baneblades as well. You could potentially give a Baneblade +1 to hit with the Salamander Command vehicle, though unfortunately this is a really expensive option at 132 points for the tank, and if you do lose your Baneblade, it's going to be pretty rubbish. You might well just be better off saving the points on that and just buying yourself another cheap Russ, which will do decent damage and be durable in its own right. Another option from Forge World is the Trojan Support Vehicle, which is both a bit cheaper and has a slightly better buff. It's 98 points, and it will let your Baneblade reroll all failed hits, essentially timesing its firepower by 1.5 if it's hitting on 4s and is otherwise unbuffed. I'd say out of the two, the Trojan is far better than the Salamander, and its value will go up the more guns that you have on your Baneblade, because obviously it will be buffing the firepower of more guns that way. Again though, you will be left with a fairly useless tank if your Baneblade does get taken out. The Warlord trait Old Grudges is something that you could realistically pair with a Baneblade as well from a nearby support character. This could allow you to choose the one enemy unit in your opponent's army that you want to delete as soon as possible, and that will let your Baneblade have full rerolls to wound against that target, so it can help your Baneblade out with its first victim. In terms of stratagems, Baneblade is likely to be one of the best recipients of various stratagems because it's such a big unit, so you get more value out of them per command point. We've already mentioned Crush Them, taking its melee potential up to something seriously quite scary, pretty much on par with an Imperial Knight stomp attacks in close combat. Other options are Jury Rigging to regain a wound. I'd most think about this if it made the difference between going up a bracket, so you're hitting on 4s rather than hitting on 5s. We did already briefly mention Defensive Gunners, but if your tank is about to be charged, then you can soup this guy up to hit on 5s. I believe that with the Steel Behemoth special rule, you'll always be able to overwatch against enemy units coming in, so this guy really is going to be a bit of a nightmare to charge if your opponent's trying to mug him with multiple units. And of course, Vengeance for Cadia is great on any unit in the Imperial Guard if you do happen to be fighting some filthy chaos. And on the biggest, fightiest unit out there, it's going to be more worth it than ever. If I was running a Baneblade against Chaos, I'd seriously consider using this stratagem on him every turn. 4 rerolls to hit and wound for 1 command point is just ridiculous. So how would I run this guy on the tabletop then? In a lot of ways, Baneblades play quite like Knights, in that they've got good manoeuvrability and don't care about moving and shooting with their heavy weapons. This means that you can potentially react quite well to your opponent. If they're a gunline army, you could potentially just trundle your Baneblade straight up to try and engage them in close combat and crush them or disrupt their firepower with those tracks. If they're a melee army, then you could hand back, have a few turns firepower while they come to you, and then at the right moment you could countercharge and maybe use Crush Them in close combat to do a significant amount of damage in close combat in your own right. I've already sort of detailed my preferred loadout for the Baneblade, which would be to take the Heavy Stubber, probably take the Hunter Killer Missile, and then I could happily have 0, 2 or 4 sponsons. I think my choice on the sponsons would probably depend what sort of list I was running him in. If there were enough big threats to scare the enemy so the Baneblade might get ignored, then I might think about adding more sponsons. But if I didn't have all that much armour and the Baneblade would be quite likely to get focused down turn 1, then I'd probably keep him cheap, as if I gave him sponsons then they probably wouldn't be firing for long. I'd probably consider the middle ground of just 2 sponsons to be pretty much the default loadout. I'd want to deploy him near any buffing characters or units that I've taken for him. As I said, if I hadn't already got Astropaths using those buffs elsewhere, I'd say it would be near mandatory to have -1 to hit and +1 armor save on him, so I'd want the Astropaths nearby. Obviously he's not going to get these buffs turn 1 unless I get first turn, so if my opponent does get first turn, I'd strongly consider trying to place the Baneblade behind as much line of sight blocking terrain as possible. Potentially try and get a cover save, though I know this might not be easy on such an enormous tank and it might not always be possible. Seeing as the Baneblade's a big unit that you have to declare a lot of firepower all at once, I'd probably think about firing the Baneblade fairly early on in the turn to make efficient use of all of those guns, and then have smaller units with more focused firepower to try and pick up the pieces and finish off the last few units that might have been damaged after the Baneblade's strike. I'd certainly make big use of stratagems, as it's such a great big value target to use them on, particularly on the first couple of turns, so we can deal some decent damage to the opposing army before those units get to work on us. Now I'd say the main weakness of the Baneblade is that it can be one-shotted with reasonable reliability by a lot of enemy forces. People are quite used to dealing with Imperial Knights with their 4-up or 5-up invul saves, so having a tank with almost the same defensive profile but no invul save is generally going to be easier to kill than a Knight, and the Baneblade, when tooled up with a couple of sponsons, costs the same as a Knight Crusader pretty much. If I was just buying a big support Lord of War type platform, I'd certainly be considering whether or not I wanted the Baneblade over an allied Knight Crusader, which also has scary guns, scary close combat, but also potentially a 4-up invul save, so is miles tougher to ranged fire. The other potential comparison I would draw would be between the Baneblade and either Leman Russes or Tank Commanders, which will be more durable point for point, though not quite as big unit that can make as efficient use of stratagems. In general, a couple of Tank Commanders armed with battle cannons, plasma cannon sponsons and las cannons will generally put more hurt on the enemy army compared with the Baneblade. So you're only really ever going to get more value out of the Baneblade if you can stack some serious buffs on it, either defensive or offensive buffs. Its other advantage, of course, is that it is a lot more happy in close combat, so you don't have to worry about screening it, as one infantry model touched in the tank will not make it useless. One final weakness of the Baneblade compared with some of these other ballistic skill 3-up options that we're talking about is its ballistic skill of 4-up. 4-up ballistic skill is quite a lot more susceptible to being neutered by modifiers, and this only gets worse when the tank starts degrading. If you're hitting on 5s and your opponent has a -1 modifier, your Baneblade's only going to be hitting with a third of its normal damage output, which is never going to be efficient realistically. So for me, the base Baneblade at least is an interesting option for the guard, and it does things that no other unit in the Codex can do. In terms of raw firepower and durability, tank commanders probably have it beat, but then you can only take 3 tank commanders, so they can't ever be part of your entire army. Also, being just such a big massive unit makes it very efficient with buffs. Even those tank commanders might struggle to win in a straight firefight against a Baneblade if it's -1 to hit and +1 to armor saves from those 2 astropaths that I'd like to take. I think that we'll need to do a bit of comparison between the Baneblade and some of the other options at a later date. But the next video I will make concerning super heavy tanks will be to review all the pros and cons of the other 7 Baneblade variants and see what sort of value we can get out of them compared with the base Baneblade chassis. Let me know any of your thoughts or opinions down in the comments below, particularly if you have any experience with fielding the Baneblade yourself. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more Imperial Guard videos every couple of days. And thank you to my supporters on Patreon who make this channel possible. So thanks again for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.